bloody harvest, the vanishing at the abandoned farm. In the fading light of autumn, when the sun dipped beneath a brooding horizon, an ancient farm stood isolated at the edge of a forgotten county road. Once a bustling homestead with fields that yielded abundant crops, it now lay abandoned, its red barns splintered by time, its fields overrun by wild, tangled vegetation, and its farmhouse a mausoleum of memories. Locals whispered of a curse that had long since taken root, of a harvest that was never truly reaped by nature alone. It was said that on moonless nights, unseen forces roamed the grounds, and souls were drawn into the darkness, never to return. The legend began with the harvest, a season when the crops, unusually bountiful yet marred by an inexplicable redness, fed more than the living. Villagers recalled eerie, disjointed voices carried on the wind and the soft rustling of corn stalks that sounded less like nature's chorus and more like a dirge. It wasn't merely the crop that bore a stain, there was talk of disappearances, of villagers, of travelers vanishing without a trace as if swallowed by the very earth. Marla, a seasoned documentarian with a taste for the macabre, had heard these tales during a chance conversation in a nearby town. Intrigued by the whispers of a bloody harvest and the mysterious vanishings, she resolved to journey to the abandoned farm. Armed with her camera, a journal, and an insatiable curiosity for the occult, she ventured into the outskirts of a region that time itself seemed to have forsaken. Her arrival at the farm was marked by an unsettling silence. The wind, a constant companion, stirred the dead leaves across the cracked dirt paths, and the farmhouse door creaked open as if inviting her in. Her footsteps echoed as she explored the property, each step drawing her further into a labyrinth of half-forgotten memories and spectral secrets. It wasn't long before she stumbled upon evidence of the disappearances. Faded photographs scattered on a decrepit porch depicted smiling families whose eyes now seemed to plead for rescue. A rusted pocket watch lay half buried in the mud, its hands forever frozen at midnight, a silent testament to a moment when time, and perhaps fate, had halted. As dusk turned to night, Marla felt an inexplicable pull toward the center of the farm, where the fields lay under a starlit sky. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the stillness, a cry so anguished and desperate that it seemed to echo from the very bowels of the earth. Marla's heart raced as she followed the sound, her camera capturing every tremulous detail. In the distance, amid the swaying cornstalks, she caught a glimpse of a figure, a person, or something resembling one running frantically, only to vanish among the shadows. The realization dawned on her, she was not the first to seek answers here, and the farm had claimed another victim. Determined to uncover the truth, Marla retraced the trail of vanished souls. Deep in the fields, she discovered an area where the soil was unnaturally disturbed. There, etched into the earth, were cryptic symbols, a macabre blend of ancient runes and modern despair. The markings told a tale of forbidden rites, a pact between mortal greed and otherworldly hunger. Each symbol pulsed with a faint, malevolent glow under the moonlight, hinting at secrets that transcended human understanding. As she delved further, the boundary between the living world and the realm of the damned grew thinner. Marla began to experience strange visions. A spectral farmer, his face contorted in perpetual agony, beckoned her toward a long-forgotten cellar beneath the barn. With trembling hands, she descended into the darkness, her only illumination a flickering lantern that cast monstrous shadows on damp stone walls. In that subterranean crypt, the horrifying truth was revealed. A centuries-old ritual had been performed here, a harvest not of crops, but of souls. The original inhabitants of the farm had struck a deal with an entity that dwelled in the murk between life and death. Each harvest season, in exchange for bountiful yields, a portion of the community's souls was offered up. Over generations, the ritual had twisted the very fabric of the land, binding the farm to a cycle of blood and despair. The victims weren't randomly chosen, they were those who dared to challenge fate, those whose lives shone too brightly against the encroaching darkness. Marla's discovery was both revelatory and terrifying. Documents and personal belongings scattered among the relics of the past recounted accounts of the vanishings. Diaries detailed frantic nights when desperate villagers sought to escape the cursed cycle, only to disappear as mysteriously as the harvest's scarlet fields. Each entry was a harrowing reminder that some bargains, once struck, were never truly broken. As the night deepened, an oppressive presence began to coalesce within the cellar. The air grew thick, charged with the malignant energy of unfulfilled promises and dark rituals. Marla sensed that the force which had demanded these sacrifices was awakening, a sentient malice that had waited, undisturbed, for centuries. The temperature plummeted, and the flickering light of her lantern was swallowed by an encroaching darkness that seemed to pulse with life. In a moment of clarity, Marla realized she was not merely an observer, she had become an integral part of this horrific tableau. The spirits of the farm's lost souls whispered in her ear, their voices intermingling with the droning chant of an unseen congregation. The spectral farmer reappeared, this time more tangible, his eyes reflecting centuries of torment and a longing for redemption. He implored her to complete the ancient rite, a desperate plea to break the cycle, to free the land from its perpetual curse. Torn between the instinct to flee and a profound compulsion to act, Marla hesitated. In that suspended moment, the boundaries of reality began to blur. Shadows writhed along the walls, and disembodied voices recited long-forgotten incantations. The entity that had feasted on human despair materialized in the form of a towering silhouette, a monstrous amalgam of human anguish and primordial darkness. Its presence was overwhelming, a vortex of malevolence that threatened to engulf Marla's very soul. The confrontation that followed was a battle of wills. Marla, armed only with her determination and the fragmented lore she had pieced together, recited the words inscribed in the ancient texts scattered around the cellar. With each syllable, the oppressive force recoiled, as if the incantation were a key unlocking a prison it had long guarded. The spectral farmer lent his strength, his anguished spirit intertwining with Marla's resolve, and together they initiated a ritual that had lain dormant for generations. In a crescendo of blinding light and searing darkness, the entity let out a sound that resonated like the shattering of 1,000 souls. The cellar trembled violently, and the very walls seemed to bleed. When the tumult subsided, silence reigned, a silence that was both haunting and liberating. The monstrous presence had been vanquished, its hold over the land broken, if only for a fleeting moment. As dawn broke, casting a pale glow over the once accursed farm, Marla emerged from the cellar forever changed. The fields, though still overgrown, no longer pulsed with the unnatural redness of cursed blood. They appeared as nothing more than a scar upon the land, a grim reminder of a pact made in desperation and sealed with human agony. Yet, the air still held a lingering chill, a reminder that some shadows never fully recede. Marla documented her experience with meticulous care, hoping that the truth of the bloody harvest would serve as a warning to those who might one day be tempted by the lure of forbidden power. Though she had escaped the clutches of the farm's ancient evil, the voices of the vanished would forever echo in her memory. The cycle of the cursed harvest might have been broken for now, but legends, like seeds sown in barren soil, have a way of sprouting anew with each passing generation. Beneath a sky that promised both rebirth and remembrance, the abandoned farm stood silent, a testament to the eternal struggle between light and darkness, and the enduring, unyielding spirit of those who dare to confront the unknown. The night visitor, eyes in the barn. On a misty autumn evening, at the edge of a long-forgotten village, an old farmhouse stood, worn by time and solitude. Next to it, surrounded by vast fields of withered wheat, loomed a moss-covered barn. The villagers spoke in hushed whispers about the darkness that lurked within, of something that watched from the shadows. They called it the night visitor, a presence that emerged when the moon hung low, its glowing eyes piercing through the barn's blackened void. When Elif decided to leave the city's chaos behind and move into her late grandfather's farmhouse, she dismissed the local tales as mere superstitions. To her, the old barn was nothing more than an abandoned relic, a place where time had stopped. But that first night, as she walked past the barn under the dim glow of the crescent moon, a strange sensation crawled over her skin. A rustling sound echoed from within the barn, too deliberate to be the wind. She turned, her breath hitching as she spotted them, two glowing eyes, staring, motionless, and cold. Elif froze. The eyes didn't blink, didn't waver, they just stared, piercing through the dark and locking onto hers. She wanted to move, but an invisible force held her in place. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the eyes vanished. Rushing back into the house, she locked the doors behind her, the villagers' ominous warning echoing in her mind, never look into the eyes in the barn. Once it sees you, it does not forget. The following nights were worse. Whispers echoed from the fields when there was no wind, and shadows shifted across the walls of her home, though no one was there. The barn door creaked open by itself, and the scent of damp earth mixed with something rotting filled the air. One morning, she found footprints in the mud leading from the barn to her window, footprints that weren't human. The imprints were elongated, almost clawed, stopping right at her bedroom window as if something had stood there, watching her sleep. The story she once dismissed as nonsense now felt all too real. Determined to understand what haunted this place, Elif spent hours researching the barn's past. She sought out the village's eldest resident, an old woman named Miriam, who hesitated before speaking in a trembling voice. That barn was built on cursed land. A long time ago, a young man disappeared there. They never found his body, only his blood, soaked into the earth. They say his soul was trapped, searching, waiting. And when someone meets his gaze, he follows. Refusing to be paralyzed by fear, that night she armed herself with a flashlight, a notebook, and a locket that belonged to her grandfather. Despite the villagers' warnings, she needed answers. As she stepped into the barn, the air turned ice cold. The wooden beams creaked overhead, the shadows deepened, and the silence was so thick it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Then she heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the farthest corner of the barn. With shaking hands, she raised her flashlight. And their two glowing eyes stared back at her. For the first time, she saw him, a figure barely human, his form flickering between solid and shadow, his face twisted in sorrow and something darker, something hungry. His voice, a whisper echoing from every corner, said, "You see me." Elif's breath caught in her throat as the reality set in. The barn was cursed, and she had looked into its eyes. The spirit continued, "You must help me. I cannot rest. They took my name, my soul. They buried my body in the walls. Find me." As her flashlight flickered, the ground trembled and the scent of decaying flesh permeated the air. With no other choice, Elif knew she had to uncover the truth before the entity claimed her as its next victim. Driven by resolve, she began to pry open the barn's floorboards and unearthed a horrifying sight, a bundle of old cloth wrapped around human bones. The air thickened, the temperature dropping further as a deafening scream echoed through the space. The spirit convulsed, its form shifting violently as it stared at the remains, whispering, "They silenced me, but now, you know." With her heart pounding, Elif gathered the bones and, despite the overwhelming sense of being watched, took them to the village cemetery. There, she buried them with a whispered prayer, hoping it would grant the restless soul the peace it had been denied for so long. That night, for the first time since her arrival, the barn fell silent, no footsteps, no whispers, no glowing eyes emerging from the darkness. Days passed, and although Elif slowly regained a sense of normalcy, she couldn't shake the memory of that eerie presence. Even as life returned to the farmhouse, she often found herself gazing at the barn, wondering if she had truly laid the spirit to rest, or if she had simply unleashed something that had been trapped for centuries. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elif took a deep breath and walked past the barn, looking toward the empty darkness inside. And for the first time, nothing looked back. But just as she turned to leave, a faint whisper brushed against her ear, "Thank you." Goosebumps crawled over her skin, yet she smiled, for in that moment, the night visitor was gone, or at least, she hoped it was. Whispers in the field, the curse of the horror farm. The summer dusk settled like a shroud over the rolling fields surrounding the old farm, a place whispered about in hushed tones by the locals. Once a thriving homestead, the horror farm had become a barren relic of tragedy and mystery, its dark history etched into every gnarled tree and rusted implements scattered among the overgrown rows. The land itself seemed to breathe secrets, as if centuries of sorrow and malice had seeped into its soil. Long before the farm's walls decayed, a family of settlers struggling against the unforgiving land had made their home there. Rumors soon spread of strange rituals and eerie occurrences on the property. Some said that on moonless nights, figures in ragged garments could be seen wandering the fields, their murmurs lost to the wind. A tragic event had shattered the family, a mysterious illness swept through, leaving behind only death and despair. Whispers claimed that a curse had been laid upon the land by a vengeful spirit, a wronged soul who had suffered unspeakable injustice. Over time, the farm's reputation transformed from one of humble perseverance to a monument of horror, a place where every rustle of the corn, every creak of the dilapidated barn, was laden with an otherworldly foreboding. Alex Mercer, a determined investigative journalist with a penchant for the paranormal, had heard the tales circulating among both locals and urban legends online. To him, the horror farm was more than just an eerie backdrop, it was a living story waiting to be uncovered. With a notebook filled with snippets of folklore and a heart pounding with anticipation, Alex set out for the farm one late autumn afternoon, when the fading sunlight painted the horizon in hues of blood red and gold. As he drove along the winding country road, a palpable tension hung in the air. The fields on either side, usually a tapestry of vibrant greens, now lay shrouded in a thick, misty veil. Every mile brought him closer to a destination that promised to be as unnerving as it was fascinating. The gate creaked open as if beckoning Alex to enter a realm where time had lost all meaning. Stepping onto the property, he was immediately struck by the silence, a silence so profound that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The once proud farmhouse, now a decrepit structure with broken windows and peeling paint, stood as a testament to the cruelty of fate. Shadows danced along the walls, and the overgrown fields whispered secrets that teased the edge of hearing. Alex began his exploration near the barn, where rusted tools and discarded relics told silent stories of a past life. It was there, amid the forgotten remnants of labor and loss, that he first heard the whispers, a faint susurration carried on the breeze. Leaning in, he could almost discern a chorus of voices, each syllable soaked in grief and mourning. The words were indistinct, yet the collective tone was unmistakably desperate. Over the next few days, Alex immersed himself in the lore of the farm. He interviewed the few surviving locals, each recounting their own chilling experiences. One elderly man, his eyes clouded with both sorrow and fear, recalled how the ground near the barn would tremble softly at night, as if something long dormant was stirring beneath. Another spoke of a spectral figure, draped in tattered garments, roaming the fields under the cover of darkness. Late one night, driven by equal parts dread and curiosity, Alex returned to the farm with only a flashlight and his recorder. The moon hummed low, casting eerie shadows that contorted into grotesque shapes. As he ventured toward the heart of the fields, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to guide him to a spot where the earth was unusually barren, a clearing where nothing grew, as if the land itself had been cursed to forever mourn. There, hidden beneath a layer of tangled brush, Alex discovered an old, iron-bound diary. Its pages, brittle with age, chronicled the final days of the settler family. The entries spoke of inexplicable phenomena, a sudden drop in temperature, an oppressive darkness that swallowed all sound, and a recurring nightmare in which the family was tormented by unseen forces. The diary ended abruptly, the last words scrawled in frantic, jagged script, "The curse awakens. The fields whisper of doom, and we are all its prey." Armed with this new evidence, Alex felt both the thrill of discovery and the weight of impending danger. That night, as he set up his makeshift camp near the clearing, the farm seemed to come alive with malevolence. The soft rustle of the wind turned into mournful wails, and the once indistinct whispers now formed coherent phrases, a litany of despair and forewarning. In his dreams, Alex found himself back in the pages of the diary. He was a child again, running barefoot through the fields, pursued by shadowy figures whose faces were twisted in anguish. Each step he took led him deeper into a labyrinth of fear, where every rustle and every gust of wind was a reminder of the curse that bound the farm. Awakening with a start, he noticed strange symbols drawn in the dew on his tent, symbols that pulsed with an eerie luminescence in the dim light of dawn. Determined to put an end to the haunting, Alex planned one final expedition into the darkest heart of the farm. Under the cover of night, armed with courage and a resolve hardened by the horrors he had witnessed, he ventured into the ancient cellar hidden beneath the farmhouse. The air grew thick and oppressive as he descended, and each step seemed to echo with the voices of the long-departed. In the depths of the cellar, the walls were lined with cryptic inscriptions and relics of a long-forgotten ritual. At the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, stained dark with what Alex feared might be ancient blood. It was here that the curse had been anchored, a sacrificial offering to an eldritch force that had been imprisoned within the very land itself. As he examined the altar, the whispers coalesced into a single, chilling command: "Release us." The plea was neither entirely hostile nor benign, it was the voice of a tortured soul, longing for deliverance. Torn between his duty as an investigator and the overwhelming impulse to escape, Alex hesitated. In that suspended moment, the ground trembled violently, and spectral forms materialized around him. These apparitions were not the grotesque caricatures of nightmares, but rather the tormented remnants of the settler family, bound by an ancient injustice and now pleading for release from an eternal torment. In a surge of defiant resolve, Alex recalled passages from the diary that hinted at a counter-ritual, a way to sever the unholy bond that tethered the spirits to the land. With trembling hands, he gathered the remnants of a tattered charm from his belongings, a locket said to contain the memory of lost hope, and placed it upon the altar. Reciting a passage in a voice that resonated with both fear and determination, he implored the restless spirits to find peace and the ancient evil to be laid to rest. The cellar exploded with a cacophony of shrieks and whispers. Time seemed to warp as light and shadow battled for supremacy in that confined space. The spectral figures surged around Alex, their forms flickering like flames in a tempest. For a moment, he felt as though the very fabric of reality was tearing apart. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the tumult subsided. The oppressive weight lifted, and a serene quiet settled over the cellar. The altar was cold and inert, and the malignant energy that had suffused the place was dissipating like a receding nightmare. In the days that followed, the farm began to change. The barren clearing showed signs of life, with small sprouts emerging from the once cursed soil. The whispers in the field, though still faint, carried a new timbre, one of gratitude rather than despair. Locals, who had long avoided the property, began to speak of a peaceful silence that had replaced the nightmarish cacophony of the past. Alex left the farm with more questions than answers, a mind forever haunted by the spectral faces he had encountered and a heart burdened with the memories of that fateful night. His article, published under the headline "Whispers in the Field: The Curse of the Horror Farm," captivated audiences far and wide. Readers were drawn not only to the spine-chilling narrative but also to the poignant reminder of how the echoes of tragedy can linger in the most unsuspecting places. Though the curse had been broken, the legacy of the horror farm endured, a testament to the enduring struggle between light and darkness, hope and despair. And on quiet nights, when the wind stirs just right, one might still hear the soft, sorrowful murmur of voices carried on the field, a reminder of the lives that once were in the curse that was finally laid to rest.